Next, we are going to hear from the National Tertiary Education Union. So the NTEU is the union representing university staff, including professional and academic staff. So we know that a number of graduate students, at the same time as being a student, you might also hold a staff contract, often as a casual or sessional. In the meantime, I might just explain a little bit about the relation between GSA and the National Tertiary Education Union, as this is quite a common question that we do get. So GSA is representing the graduate students in your capacity as students, whereas the NTEU is representing staff in their capacity as staff, and often there is an overlap between the issues experienced, particularly for graduate research students. You might be occupying both the staff and student role at the same time, and it may be tricky to distinguish if an issue you're experiencing is due to you being a student or due to you being a staff member. So sometimes we will get contacted by a student with something that seems like more of an issue relating to their employment, in which case we'll always refer to the NTEU to try to sort that out. We do work very closely alongside the NTEU on a number of campaigns, and we also always kind of keep each other updated on what's going on. So at the moment, there is a little campaign on cuts to subjects. So at the moment, some subjects for semester 2 seem to be not offered. And we know that some of those are just because it might be a placement subject or an international experience subject, which is no longer realistically cannot be run this semester anyway. But we're not too sure if some of the subject cuts might actually be due to cost-saving measures. So we're currently gathering some information on that. We've just conducted a little survey and we'll have the results in soon, and that's something where we will be working with the NTEU on how to advocate and move forward on that. And we know UMSU as well is also taking up this issue, and they've run their own survey. We've just put up another one just to get a little bit more information on the graduate side of things specifically. So it can sometimes be a little confusing to know how all of the different representative bodies within the university work. And the important thing is we do all work together. So if a student comes to us and we think their issue could actually be better solved by another body in the university, we'll always suggest to them that put them in touch with the person that might be able to help them. We've also worked with the NTEU on issues relating to wage theft in the university. So when tutors aren't being paid correctly, and often those tutors are graduate students and particularly graduate research students. So the NTEU, in a campaign that was endorsed and supported by GSA last year, advocated to the university, and they managed to get some really big wins, and I'm sure when Annette arrives she'll talk a bit more about that. But that's a really fantastic outcome, and something that we're at GSA really proud to be a part of in attaining that outcome for university staff, but also students. It's also important to note the overlap of university staff conditions are the learning environment for students. So if we think that, or if staff are saying that they're not being treated correctly, or there's an issue in terms of their employment, we see that as a negative, not just because, you know, of course we're empathetic, but also because that might reflect in the learning conditions for students. So if a tutor isn't being paid for enough marking hours, then a student might not get as much feedback in their assignment, and that's a really outcome that we would want to avoid. So that's why it is really advantageous for us to work really closely with the NTEU on those overlapping issues. Annette's just about to arrive. I'll just quickly speak about one more thing we've been doing with the NTEU, and that is our Parents on Campus research. So last year, we conducted a survey of students and staff that have child caring responsibilities. We have had over 100 responses to that survey, and it explored the barriers that student parents specifically experience at the University of Melbourne. We will be releasing that report very soon, within the next couple of weeks. And that's something where we worked really closely with the NTEU in order to promote that survey, make sure it's getting out to the right audience, and also in identifying the issues and constructing the survey in the first place, just because we do know that overlap between issues. So a couple of findings from that survey were actually that university policies are often not made with student parents in mind. So you might think of the default student as someone who might be young, unencumbered, doesn't have family responsibilities, but increasingly that is not the case. And we do know that students with caring responsibilities often do need a bit of extra support. So that might be in terms of being able to access extensions, having a bit of flexibility with their course, particularly this semester with the move to online schooling for a lot of students. That has presented real challenges for student parents, because they have to manage not only their own studies, but also their children's studies. And earlier in the year, we heard from a lot of graduate researchers who are really struggling. And we also heard from a lot of coursework students who are really concerned about the impact that homeschooling is going to have on their grades, because they just simply don't have that quiet space and that time while their kids are at school to focus on their studies. So that was one of the reasons why we advocated to the university for a pass-fail opt-in WAM changes. So students who didn't do so well in semester one won't have their weighted average mark dragged down as a result of that. And that's not just for the student parents, of course, that's for everyone. And more holistically, we did hear from a whole heap of students experiencing a whole heap of different circumstances, all of which could be remedied by those changes to WAM. And we did hear from a few student parents after those changes were implemented that they were so relieved that they would be able to continue their studies, they'd be able to continue taking care of and homeschooling their kids. They'd get through the semester, they'd keep progressing through their degree, and they didn't have to worry so much on the grade side of things. So that was a really fantastic outcome for us, and where we've really looked out for the needs of the student parents. So we're still just waiting a couple minutes for Annette. Maybe Lily, would you have anything to add, particularly about that relationship between GSA and NTEU and how we're working together?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. Yeah, so I know that our president, Jeremy, is in contact with NTEU specifically. We have a couple of members of the council as well who are also themselves members of NTEU, and it's a really vital partnership that we have with working with them to make sure, like Natasha was saying, that we are able to look after graduate students in a really holistic way. And I think Annette has just arrived, so I might pass it back.
Yeah, thanks, Lily. Great, Annette, thanks so much for joining us today. So I'll just provide a little introduction to Annette Herrera. So she is an NTEU Casual Staff Representative and currently the Acting Vice President for Professional Staff at the University of Melbourne branch of the National Tertiary Education Union. And Annette is also actually a graduate of Melbourne University. So she has 2 master's degrees, one in social policy and one in international relations. Her studies focused on Australia's migration and multicultural policy, labour rights and international union movements. So she's been in Melbourne since 2015 when she was doing her postgraduate studies, and since then she's worked in a range of roles in continuing, fixed term and casual capacities at the university. Currently she is the Chancellery Research Strategy, works in Chancellery Research Strategy as a project officer, and at the union she is the Casual Staff Representative, Acting Vice President, And she's also worked on some of those campaigns and advocacy with the GSA, which I was speaking about just a little bit earlier, particularly relating to wage theft. And she's also worked very hard to build a strong relationship between us and the NTEU. Annette, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here today. Over to you.
Great, thanks, Natasha. And can everyone hear me okay? Great. Thanks for that lovely introduction. I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen. So I'm just going to stop sharing this one. Let's continue. Yes, great. All right, wonderful. Hopefully everyone can see that. I'm just going to basically, for the next few minutes, talk a little bit about the NTEU. We're the National Tertiary Education Union, and we represent staff at 33 different universities across the country. And when I mean staff, I mean professional staff, academic staff, and we also have members who are postgrads. And as many of you know, many times when you're doing your studies, I know I did, I worked at the university as well. So it's really good to know what other associations are on campus and who represents you for different issues. And as Natasha said, we do work together often to do and provide advocacy for our postgrads here at the university. So as I mentioned, National Tertiary Education Union, the NTEU, represents higher ed and vocational ed. Besides the workplace rights, which I'll get into a little bit, we also focus quite a lot on, and we have a campaign at the moment around financial transparency, fairness, equity, and social justice, and as well as issues around climate justice. So at the University of Melbourne NTEU branch, we really see the union movement as part of a larger social movement. So it's more than work rights. And so this kind of picture just says it all. The reason we have these associations, and especially right now when we're in the middle of a pandemic, is so that we're not going through our particular issues alone, and we're much stronger when we advocate and organize to win different issues around work rights when we do that together. I think that's certainly not, that work actually has increased since COVID in terms of that advocacy. It hasn't diminished, and also it's really about being connected to your wider university community, especially during this time. So just a few facts around higher education in Victoria, and this is kind of goes to anyone who's also interested in working in academia after your postgrad studies, is that there is quite a lot of insecure work, unfortunately, in the university sector. So unfortunately, Melbourne Uni is number one, I think, this year in insecure work in the country. So 73% of the actual staff at the University of Melbourne are on insecure contracts. And so certainly that feeds into some of the issues around underpayments and wage theft when you have precarious work. I'll talk a little bit briefly about some of the campaigns we've run. And this again has been often with the support of GSA. But we have, last year we ran a few campaigns around just focusing on dignity of work. If you are working at the university, it is not a, and you know, you're a research assistant, you're a tutor, you're working in Stop 1. It's not an internship. It's not called an internship. It's actually paid work, and you actually have to get paid for that. So I think just having some of that knowledge helps you understand like what your rights are and what you can ask for. Certainly, a big campaign we've had was around wage theft. So some of the ways that underpayment has been occurring was around tutors not being paid for lecture attendance, getting 15 minutes to mark a 3,000 word paper, things like that. Like these things add up. And especially when you're studying and working, you don't have, you don't actually, it just adds to the stress, and you don't have, you know, that extra time to put in if you're not getting paid. So that's actually one important campaign I'll probably just touch on for a few minutes, but we have had back pay claims for you know, tutors in engineering and arts and faculty of fine arts and music and science. So if you're working as a tutor in any of those faculties and you want to have a discussion, that is that campaign is still ongoing. And certainly, like the GSA, we work quite closely with our national NTEU advocacy team, and we actually push on the federal government as well in terms of funding. So, I mean, this is an issue that's very near and dear to both staff and students. Most staff are absolutely appalled at the increase in fees and what's being proposed. And certainly the cuts to funding impact staff as well. If the teaching budgets are being cut, if the research funding is being cut, that means less support for students. And so that's why we often advocate together. So the Education for All stop fee hikes, again, that's something the NTEU put out in solidarity with students. I also just wanted to talk a little bit about climate justice, because that certainly does not go away during the COVID crisis. And again, it's really about thinking about how higher education can play a role in climate justice and moving away from fossil fuels. And so we actually have a lot of postgrads involved that are GSA members and also NTEU members in the climate justice movement, and asking questions of the university around why is ExxonMobil at job fairs? Why do we still take research funding from Rio Tinto? And really thinking of kind of pushing back on some of that those commitments the university makes around climate action, but then where our research funding comes from. I also just wanted to touch really quickly on a few campaigns that have been started through some of our postgrad members at the NTEU, and that's around universal extensions for HDRs. And we have a casuals network with the NTEU, and so that's a lot of PhD students who are also tutors, and so really advocating for universal extensions. And I know there's been a few wins on that recently. So I think that's still a way, that is still a way that you can get involved with the NTEU. We have a casuals network that talks about HDR issues. I had this back in one slide, but a picture around unannounced removalist clear graduate tests amidst office changes. Obviously, this was back when we were all on campus, but even just the issues around hot desking were things that we really wanted to kind of fight around dignity of work and your rights as a student and a worker. So that is a little bit of what's happening in the this year, really the wage theft and looking at universal extensions and standing in solidarity with GSA. And this is also just a link of where you can join and get more involved. I will say that postgrad membership is actually free. So we do have paid membership if you're a casual tutor, but if you're a postgrad, it is free, and it's just a way to link up and start learning about your work rights. I think that was it. I spoke really quickly because I was late trying to get in. But if there's any questions, that would be great as well.
Thank you, Annette. So we'll just leave a moment for any attendees to pop questions in the chat if they'd like to. I just wanted to ask a bit more about the postgrad membership. So for students, could you tell us a little more about that?
Sure. So the postgrad membership, basically, it allows you to, I guess the benefit of postgrad membership, because I was a postgrad member before I started to work at the university. And it just, if you're going to stay and especially work in the academia, it's just good to know about what's happening, what different campaigns, what your work rights are as well. And I think it also, there are different networks within the NTEU. Probably our most active membership group is amongst our HDR and casual members. So we have a casuals network that meets fortnightly. We talk about our different campaigns, but we also have, we do different kind of skill share sessions. We had a session last year, we'll probably run again, around how to find research funding as a casual worker. So it's not just the campaigns, but it's also about building some of the knowledge and around working in the academy, or again, kind of the researcher issues that you might have as an early career or PhD student. So I put in the link, but it is actually for joining, but there are different memberships, and as a postgrad, it is, like I said, it's free to join, and you'll get on the newsletter and the lists and things like that. And we have a closed Facebook group and things like that. So it's really just kind of help, again, build that community and stay in touch, especially right now. I think it's really important to make sure you have a lot of supports in our virtual community, and that's definitely one that we have. I will just say as well that we have been making quite a lot of contacts and working closely with other unions recently. So we're putting on a symposium in a few weeks, and we'll have discussions with other unions and other groups that also have a lot of representation of students. So I guess we're talking about like United Workers Union. We'll be working with Migrant Workers Center. So again, it's focused on work, but also some of the industries that students are working in, not just in the academy. So that was a really long response to your question, Natasha, but yeah.
Great, thank you. And just one more question. If someone is a casual and they're starting to experience some issues in their workplace and they want some advice, what should they do?
That's a good question. So in terms of if you're working at the university now, I'd say just I would get in touch with our, happy to put in my email address in here as well, but I can put you in touch with our network. I mean, the first thing, if you're having issues in your workplace, contact your union. So first step is to join, but also just get in touch if you have a question. We have delegates. So those are union members who are staff, and they are in each workplace. And so we would introduce you to whoever your delegate is. And in particular around the issue of wage theft, we have quite a lot happening in that space. So we would kind of put you in touch with that particular work area, since there's different issues in different areas. So again, I guess I'm gonna take some action. I would, consider the taking the free membership, also getting in touch if you have any other questions, and happy to put you in touch with our organizers and delegates. So I can't say enough, like our HDR and casual staff who are also GSA members are quite active in this space. So it's a great community to be a part of.
Thanks so much, Annette. So that's some great information for our newly joining students. If you are also a staff member, the advice is to join your union. If you're not a staff member but you want to stay abreast of what NTEU is up to, then take up that postgrad membership. And I'd just like to add to that, NTEU has fantastic social media presence as well. So if you'd prefer to stay updated on them that way, and you're across social media, that's a great thing to do as well. If anyone comes up with a question for Annette a bit later on, she has put her email address in the chat. So please do feel free to get in touch with her, or if you lose her email address, then you can contact us at GSA and we can put you in touch and do that information referral. Once again, thank you so much, Annette.